Welcome everyone. Good afternoon for those of you here from the UK. I'm Johanna Beresford, the CEO of InDiverse Company, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Simon Rodgers and Kate Munday for a really important conversation around LGBTQ plus and inclusion in the workplace and stories from the community. So I'd like to just first talk a little bit about some of the things that we're hoping to explore and discuss as we go through the event, and then introduce you to our two speakers. So LGBTQ plus and young people are sadly some of the most excluded in society today. And this can have really long-term lasting effects on them as individuals, both from a psychological and a social point of view, as well as from an academic and professional perspective. We want to spend some time today really exploring some stories from the community and focusing on lived experience of both inclusion and exclusion throughout our speakers' lives, from coming out to overcoming obstacles to navigating the workplace and beyond. We'll also hopefully have some time to explore what organisations could do better to support people from the community and how we can ensure the culture is inclusive for people at all stages in their working life. So I'd like to firstly introduce Kate Munday. Kate is an award-winning international speaker and champion of authenticity. She's 10 years experience working in sales and marketing with some of the most globally recognised companies within the FTSE 500. Kate's own company, Out of the Box Speakers, helps people with diverse backgrounds master the art of public speaking through workshops and mentoring. And her ambition is to inspire individuals to speak openly about their stories and break out of the box that society has confined them to. And she's currently client strategy lead at Google. Kate, would you be able to add to a little of what I've said and share a bit about you personally and why you're so passionate about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Johanna, for that lovely introduction. Thank you for having me as well as part of your panel. It's always a pleasure to get up and speak myself, as well as, like you just alluded to, I help coach others in speaking. And that's really my passion point. I think going beyond my day job in Google in ways, as you mentioned, which is all around sales, where I get up and speak, I actually dedicate a lot of my time internally for Google as well as a speaking coach for them. And my passion point is really about helping people speak their truth. So this is probably a lot of what we're going to be doing today, speaking our truths and telling our stories, because I feel like life is a story and you're the author and you get to write that story. And like, how cool is that? But not only that, we get to share it with other people. And that's really my mission. I'm on a mission to smash stereotypes. I always get told I don't look gay. I'm not sure what that even means anymore. What does it mean to look gay? So that's my mission, smashing those stereotypes and helping people really speak out about their truth. Because for me, a lot of my journey was around having somebody who had the same look and feel as me, who got up on stage and she said, you know, I'm gay and it's cool. I'm having a great time. I'm living my life and I'm speaking out about it freely. And I was like, whoa, that is so empowering. And from that moment, that really helped me in my journey and enabled me to be really truthful about who I am. Mm-hmm. So yeah, very much looking forward to delving a bit more into that today. So thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you, Kate. And as we talk, and it's so inspiring to hear your passion and your boldness and the work that you're doing. And as we talk, and I'd really like to understand how you've kind of come and whether you've always felt as confident as you have today about speaking about your story. And I can see from your smile, perhaps not, so I'm interested in that. Simon Rodgers is our second speaker and panel member. Simon is the people director for One Young World. He was previously the head of D&I for the global insurance giant Aviva, and he's a passionate advocate of all things around diversity and inclusion and equality throughout his career. Simon runs his own consultancy, and he helps organisations achieve greater inclusion, not just internally, but also in the communities they are part of and the communities they serve. Simon has spent a lot of time supporting various community-based projects and initiatives to drive greater equality across national and global communities. And Simon is also Equalities Lead for the World Humanitarian Forum and a trustee of the Maggie Oliver Foundation. And he has a particular interest in equal rights of the LGBTQ plus community. Simon, could you add a little to what I've just shared, and again, why you're so passionate about the conversation we're going to have today?
Well, I think that was a wonderful introduction. So thank you, and I'll try and add. I think I've always been on a journey with equality, and particularly with LGBT inclusion as well. It's something that's obviously been a part of my life as a gay cisgender man. It's something that I've always sought to explore and to learn from, and also learn from other people's experience. I guess it's really empowering to hear people's stories, and I'm really excited to hear more of what Kate has to say on how we allow people to tell their stories. I've always been really passionate about people being able to be themselves, to be able to live their best lives, and to really do the best work of their lives as well. And I think that comes from different areas, from the workplace, but also in society and in communities as a whole. So my passion point has really been on the individual, and the idea that the individual can be themselves and can do their very best work in the workplace, but have that freedom outside of work as well. So I'm very much passionate about self-empowerment and being able to give people and encourage that self-empowerment as well.
Thank you. And both of the work that you are doing and have done has obviously been in the workplace. So my first question is, and if you can relate as happily as you are to your own personal stories, is how much progress do you think we've made, or have we made progress in the workplace in ensuring that those from the community feel included in the workplace? Simon, if you wanted to start with that, and then go over to you, Kate.
Yeah, absolutely, and Kate, please feel free to jump in at any time with anything that I say. I think we've made some good progress. That sounds quite broad. I think locally, I'm in the UK, so I think we've made some good progress in the UK, but there's always a lot more to do. I think there's consideration around the global community as well, because working for global organisations, then we have to appreciate that LGBTQI plus equality just isn't the same in different parts of the world. So I think I've seen in the UK some good shifts on LGBTQ. I mean, I started this journey back in 2007 when I established helped establish an LGBT network in the workplace. In those days, I was being told by our internal comms department that we couldn't do or we couldn't talk about anything to do with LGBT just on the intranet because it was too controversial a subject, right? That was 2007. And now we look at the amount of corporate engagement that we see in LGBT equality, which I think is incredible and has been quite a journey, and a journey hard fought by a lot of people. I think there's a danger of rainbow washing at the moment. So we're in Pride Month. We see corporate organisations that want to fly the flag, that showing that very visible support, I think is incredibly important, but it has to be genuine and it can't be a tokenistic nod to LGBT inclusion once a year. I think organisations really need to look at what they're doing authentically and doing what they're doing inside the organisation. But I think there's a good balance at the moment between what employees are demanding in terms of equality in the workplace, but also what consumers and customers are demanding as well. And I think that's a good place to be where you had two competing demands where organisations have actually not been there before. So I think good progress. I think there's still a lot more to be done, and particularly when you look at some of the specifics of some of the smaller minorities within the LGBTQI plus community. So particularly looking at the B, T, the Q, the I, and the other elements of sexual orientation, gender identity, but also considering the intersectionality of diversity. So it's not just the LGBTQI plus community, but also how that intersects with other groups as well that are feeling particularly marginalised or minoritised. But Kate, interested to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to build a lot on what Simon said, I think. For me, I guess, ultimately, I always look at like, what's the goal here? Where do we want to get to? And for me, ultimately, I think not having to come out at all. I struggled a lot with that with my personal journey. That kind of whole idea around coming out, I think, is a bit of a weird concept. Also because it's a progress, it's a journey where you continuously question. And for me, 1 minute I was bi, and then I was lesbian, now I'm more associated with gay. So that term has completely changed. And I think it's quite hard for individuals and companies to adapt. It's because it's such a broad spectrum. But in general, I think we've got a long way to go to get to that point, but we are on the right track and we've made some great progress. I think that, like I said, that landscape is very complex. It's something I'm always mindful of as well when I put on events or I speak at events, is making sure I have good representation at those events as well. You know, you just talked about it, Simon. It's not just about sexual orientation anymore as well. It's also gender, and also the fact that not to just make that about the LGBT community. I want to make sure that when we're having these events, we're educating on a broader spectrum as well. And everybody feels included. Everybody feels like it's a good opportunity to join and to learn something. And I think even just through those letters, we can see how that has evolved over time. You know, it used to be LGBT, now it's LGBTQ+, then it went to LGBTQIA+. I mean, I can understand where the confusion lies. I even get confused, and I'm a part of the community. So I think it's really important that we keep going, keep educating, make sure everybody is represented. And I think, like you said, Simon, about that global aspect as well. You know, Pride used to be a political stand. That's what it is. It's actually a political movement. And I think we've come away from that, and now it's seen very much as a party, which is great. And it's good to show that, you know, people are celebrating being, you know, and being comfortable in their own skin, and they're actually having a great time and doing whatever they're doing. But also, I think it's really important that we continue that political movement, because we've got to recognize the fact that in some countries, it's still not legal, still not acceptable to be who you are, and it's huge. So I think we need to keep going and keep doing what's going to be right for the community on a global level.
And if I can, Kate, sorry, I'll come back to that, because I think you made some really good points there as well. I think I love your point about the keep going and the keep educating, because I think one of the challenges that we have is actually around complacency. I've been speaking to an organisation recently where you've got younger people coming into the workplace who haven't experienced the same homophobia, biphobia, transphobia that some other people have. So they have different expectations in the workplace. I think that point around Pride being a protest, I think, continues to be a debate and a discussion. I think when I've reflected on that before, when I've gone to Pride, I've felt the celebration, but it's because I've been doing stuff all year round. You know, it's a deep breath when you're at Pride, because you're around your people. You've all been working to do different things in different parts of the world, different parts of the organisation. And for me, I feel the celebration because it's that exhale of, wow, we've done another year, and this is our time to really, really be ourselves and enjoy being there. And I think your point kind of, and I guess leading on from that as well, your point around, you know, what it's like globally, still illegal to be gay in 71 countries around the world. There's 11 where it's punishable by death. you know, that's frightening, and that's real, and it's whilst we've advanced our own cause, and I speak about the UK and where I'm based, but we have to do more globally. Hungary has just introduced legislation that's equivalent to the UK Section 28, which was repealed in 2008, but banned the promotion of homosexuality in local authorities, and that's essentially what's happening in Hungary. It's the banning of the promotion of homosexuality in schools, or well, to minors generally. What's more terrifying about that is that it's been appended to legislation around child abuse. So it's making a very clear link through the mouths of politicians between homosexuality and paedophilia. Like, this is going back. This is going backwards, not forwards. In Poland, there's LGBT free zones, you know, and this is just crazy that this is happening, and that's what we have to look at when we consider where we go next, and ultimately, Kate, to what you said, you know, where we want to be in the future. We fight for ourselves, but we have to fight for others. And I think, yeah, to the point of Pride as a protest, it has to continue to be a protest. It has to be political. We have to demand more. There were protests last week in Liverpool following a spate of homophobic attacks in the city. You know, this is still happening. So yeah, I love your point, Kate, that Pride is a protest, and Pride should continue to be a protest.
Thank you both. Really, really important points, and that the point in it, it's so stark, isn't it? That data point you shared there, Simon, you know, in 71 countries, and I absolutely agree. You know, there is a lot, and we continue to see it. That actually, for many countries, we're moving backwards, not forwards, and the experiences. I feel very fortunate. My entire career, I've spent traveling internationally, and have been really, really fortunate to work in lots and lots of different countries. And, you know, my old CEO was gay, and there are certain places we would go and they wouldn't speak to him, they wouldn't engage with him as soon as he came out, and he was running a huge global organization. And you know, this is you know, today, and you know, he's a huge, you know, does a huge amount of work in this area, but there are lots of countries where he goes to where his experience is very, very different, and I think that in itself is complex. But also, I think then when you're thinking about your role in the work context as well, it's, you know, how does it intersect with the role that you're doing, particularly when you're in a global organization? And for a global organization, how do you ensure that you're making sure that everyone in the community feels as though they're having a similar experience?
I think it's all an individual experience. So me personally, I definitely have felt the impact of what Google is doing in my story and my journey. So it was actually, I remember a coming out type event they had, was in the cafeteria with some drinks and that kind of events you can imagine. And it was actually the small gesture of my colleague saying, come on, let's go and have a look. And normally this is something I would like avoid at all costs. I'd be like, don't know what they're doing over there, and just skirt around it and walk away. But it was that small gesture of my colleague saying, let's go and just, you know, let's just go and have a look casually. And we did. And actually then that in itself, just going and have a look at what they're doing and chatting to some of the people, made me feel a little bit more comfortable in being myself and being honest and being truthful to my colleagues. So it's twofold. It was having the company in itself run these different events, and throughout the year, I think that's really important, and making people feel like they can just come and, you know, it's fine. Even if you're an ally or you're gay or whatever, it doesn't matter. You just kind of come along and be a part of it. And then it was also that small gesture as well of the ally in my colleague coming to support me. And those two combined for me were real big movers in my journey. And I feel like this is something that companies are really making a change in. They're hosting more events to educate allies in what they can do to support, and we've now got like aliases to email groups of allies as well. We're also hosting events not just during Pride, but throughout the year, to make sure that it's a continued effort of education and awareness. And I think these things are all helping us progress and helping people feel more comfortable at the workplace. But like I said, that is my own individual experience. I can imagine how there is still, you know, I've also been subject to homophobia in the workplace as well. So there's that counteracting part that there's still work to do. There is still going to be homophobia, and there's still going to be mis or underrepresentation as well to some degree. So I think it's a continual process, but I think we are getting better at it.
I think if I come in on that point about the individual journey as well, I think that's just so incredibly important. I think if I reflect on the question, you know, is this really, are all these efforts really being felt on the ground? Is the progress that's been made in society, is that being felt on the ground in the workplace? I think it is very much an individual journey, and I think it's important to recognise that as well. There isn't a single solution to actually bringing all of this into the workplace and making it relevant, because it's how the individual feels. And I think there's different perspectives that I've seen over time as well. I mean, I've always been incredibly fortunate. Wherever I've worked, I've always been out from day one, and that's who I am. But it's because of the way that I've felt. Over the years, I've thought about the people sat around me, the people that don't feel that they can be out, or the people that might not feel comfortable being themselves or talking about their same-sex partner, or talking about their trans identity. It's those people that I've been kind of most passionate about to actually use my platform, because I have been able to be myself at work, to give them that encouragement. I think I still see graduates going into the workplace and in some workplaces going back in the closet before they feel the real right, I can be myself. So there's a lot that you can glean from a website, there's a lot that you can glean from things like Glassdoor and everything, but actually until you're on the ground, you don't know how that feels. And I think I've seen plenty of grads who go back in the closet until they can really test that organization and then come out. I think there's also there is quite a focus on recruiting grads in that respect as well, but there's also there has to be consideration for people that have been in an organization for some time. So as organizations change and we encourage people to be themselves, there's actually people that I've worked with who've been in the closet, that have not been out at work for their whole careers, and now we're asking them to suddenly come out. That's a really big step. Because they've known colleagues and they've engaged with people every working day of their working lives in an organisation, and now we're asking them to do something that really steps out of that comfort zone and actually open up in a way that they haven't before, that in a way that they've hidden, or they've lied about their lives outside of work. So I think there's different considerations for different groups of people, but I think it's great to see the impact that that a lot of the work is having. I was with an organisation recently where someone said that they identified as non-binary, and for the first time they've been able to say that at work because they felt so comfortable doing that. And I think that is those things that we have to keep hold of. You know, I'm a big advocate of reflecting on some of the aha moments that we have, or some of the little wins that we have, because we're all passionate about this subject, we're all doing good things, but you just have to take a moment to think, gosh, that was because of what we've done collectively over time. That's one individual that we've made a difference to, and that feels great. So I think, Kate, absolutely, your point on individualize or an individual journey and approach, I think is really, really key.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so important, as you were both saying there, firstly, that we can't make stereotypes. We can't assume that everyone is going to respond to the same way, to the same initiatives and so forth. And that's really important. But also, it's, as you were mentioning there at the end, Simon, is the impact that stories have on the psychology for others as well, and again the momentum that that can build. And again, you see it in lots of different aspects, you know, within organizations. Once some people start to feel comfortable, as more stories are shared, you start to see some momentum. But it was really interesting, Simon, that point that you said people are going back into the closet, you know, when they've moved from university. And, you know, to some extent you could see, you know, in a university environment, for many of us, my university days were many years ago, but the environment and the relationship that you have with your friends, the openness, and actually a lot of the activism has come from, you know, those generations and people that were in university, people, and then you're going into what for many can feel a very, very corporate world where there are a set of rules and a set of principles. And often it's then our own biases, aren't there, that the organization or the system is going to think of me like X or think of me like Y as well. So I think again that in itself is, there's some really interesting psychology around that, and some really important lessons I think organizations and particularly leaders need to be thinking about in terms of the role of allies, and the role that allies really play to make particularly those that are coming into the workplace for the first time feel comfortable. I wanted to move on to the next question, which is really around the role of schooling and parenting.
Yeah, so a really good question, and I think it's incredibly important. I guess I really kind of upped my activism after I'd given a speech over in the US a few years ago, and my teacher, or one of my old teachers, actually saw this speech that I gave about LGBT equality globally, and asked if I would then go back to the school and speak to the young people there, because they had a real problem with homophobia. And goes back to the point that I made before, you know, all the time that I was at school, I'm showing my age, I was in secondary school between 97 and 2002. And it wasn't until 2003 that Section 28 was repealed, right? So I remember being at school, and I remember a teacher telling me that I perhaps shouldn't be so camp. And I'm like, what? Like, camp being kind of effeminate or more gregarious. I don't know, perhaps where she was going with that, but that was the kind of, I didn't realize that legislation was there that whole time that I was at school. And I've then seen the damage that that's done since, because Section 28 prevented people from talking about homosexuality, but it also prevented schools from effectively dealing with homophobic bullying, and homophobic bullying becoming biphobic, transphobic, etc., etc. So when I went back to a school, I could see the homophobia that was there, the biphobia, the transphobia, but actually having an interaction with a school and actually talking to the young people there directly about LGBTQI+, then it was amazing to see the difference that it made in young people. And I think more of that in schools is really important, because it really helps open up that discussion and makes schools feel an inclusive place, which I think is really important. I also had conversations with primary school teachers where I was kind of advocating for more inclusion and more conversations on diversity as well. And primary schools pushed back quite firmly because they didn't think it was a place to talk about sexual orientation or gender identity. And my challenge back to them was like, look, I don't want you to talk about these things necessarily in such an explicit way, but let's just talk about diverse families. Right, so every family is different. So let's just talk about that, and let's build inclusion into the conversation that we have about someone having just one mummy, or one mummy and one daddy, or one mummy and two daddies, or, you know, all of the different ways that families are made up, and bringing in some of that intersectionality that I mentioned before, that people might have a white mummy and a black daddy. You know, there's different ways of looking at families. So let's bring that into the conversation. Let's build the inclusion there. So I think it's really important that schooling is done right. I think there's a lot that parents can do as well. And actually what I love here is the crossover between the work that you do in the workplace and the things that you learn at work, and those lessons of allyship that you then take home, and the conversations that you then have at home with your kids, and equally those conversations come back into the workplace as well, because I've had parents who have phoned me up when they've had a child that has come out as lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and they've not had anywhere else to turn. They didn't know how to respond or what to do because of their own lack of education. So they've come to me in the workplace, and we've been able to have a conversation there. So yeah, I think parenting and schooling is incredibly important, and from a young age to enable young people to feel that they can be themselves, but also be allies from a young age, perhaps without even realising it.
Everything that you were saying there, Simon, really, really resonated. And I'm a parent of many children, some very young, some teenagers, and the importance of having this conversation is, and what you were saying is really interesting. My 8-year-old daughter, her homework actually 2 weeks ago was all around diverse families. So it was all around, and so we sat for hours talking about different families. And you would hope, from the work that I do, my daughter is really confident about talking about this. And we've got lots of friends with mixed race, different ethnicities, people from the LGBTQ plus community that really in her lives. And she was able to have really, really good conversations, and many of her friends really, really weren't. And I then went to the school and started talking to them about the work that I did. And I had some real pushback from other parents around 8 being too young to be having these conversations, or my son is 4, and 4 being too young. And I've really, really had some, what I feel are really important, challenging conversations, not with the school, because the school, I'm very lucky, the school's really bought into this and has been doing a lot of work in this area, but for many of the parents. And I think that your point at the end there, Simon, is really important. For parents, it's about being able to be confident that if your son or your daughter needs to come out, that they feel that they're really able to, but also that our children are having conversations, and that they're having the right conversations, and they know the language that they should be using, and that they're really, really aware. And I think that it is just so critical that we're having these right conversations. Kate.
Yes, absolutely. I'm again going to build on what you guys really talked about, more so about at home, really, for me, because that was really the important part of my journey. So if I look back, I definitely was brought up in a very homophobic household, though my mother likes to deny it, and I bring up about 10 different examples of when she's been homophobic, which she cannot deny. And I think that for me was why being gay was just off the cards. It was not even an option. So that transition, and when I started to realize, that actually came in my adulthood and a lot later in life for that exact reason. And it's something I really struggled with as well. I think it's a really emotional, confusing time that we need those support systems, those school systems, those home systems, work, whatever that is, around us, to be allies and support us through those very confusing times. So, and I think looking back, when I did eventually come out and eventually found the strength to tell my parents, which was also a very funny story, I guess. I was telling them that I was dating Paul for the whole time. And then eventually in a car park with my mother, of all glamorous places, I told her that I had to tell her something. And actually it was Paula, not Paul, which she found very confusing. She cried lots and I think she thought I was dying at the time. So that actually was a better outcome. But nonetheless, one thing she was really upset about when I came out, as I told her that actually I'd known about this for, I think it was 4 years or something. And that for her, she was like, wow, so you've known this for 4 years and you've only just been able to tell me. And I think she had created a safe environment, that psychological safety we talk about so much at work is so important also in the home, creating that environment where kids feel like they can go and talk to their parents about anything. They can just have that conversation. And I think that's a really important part. When I become a parent, the most important thing for me is that whatever my kids are doing, it doesn't really matter. It's that they talk to me about it. they talk about how do they feel, and we digest it and we break it down as a family. And if we need to go and research stuff together, that's brilliant, but we're going to do it together. And having somebody there is something that I didn't have, and it actually added a lot of complexity, confusion, and probably drew out the process as well. So I think keep it simple is what I'd also recommend as well. Keep it simple and keep it open. Have those open conversations, and yeah, allow your kids to talk freely.
If I can jump in on that point as well, because I think, Kate, that's just a perfect point to raise, just about home and about family, which I think is really important. I was speaking with the Albert Kennedy Trust last week. The Albert Kennedy Trust, they're a charity which supports LGBTQI plus young people who are made homeless because of who they are and I guess who they love. The message from them, or the message that I've always taken from them, is so heartbreaking that they're a charity that is there to support young people because they're on the streets, because their families don't accept them. You know, by the nature of needing that charity in the UK is just appalling. And that's just and that's in somewhere that we've said in the UK is quite advanced, and we've been doing more stuff than the rest of the world. And in lockdown alone, you know, that issue has been compounded because they've had a 71% increase in the number of service users that have been contacting them. And I gloss over service users. I'm not talking about service users. I'm talking about kids. I'm talking about kids that are preferring to be on the streets than at home with their own family. That is the scale of the issue that we find, and that's what we're empowered to challenge through the education and through the environment that we foster as well. And I think as I'm in the kind of spirit of doom and gloom, and on this point, then. A couple of weeks ago, I was riding my bike through Leicester Square. I stopped off at an office that I work in, and I jumped off my bike, and some kid, a teenager, probably about 14, 15 years old, went riding the bike past me and stopped and said, "Are you gay?" Which was a really bizarre question to ask in the middle of Leicester Square. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're disgusting. You should be hung." He said, "You're absolutely disgusting." And I was just completely shocked by this. I mean, I've been on this journey of advocacy for years and years and years, and I've had some very challenging conversations over the years. But for me, at 35 years old, to be stood and feel intimidated in Leicester Square in central London by a 14, 15-year-old who's been educated in schools in this country, that again highlights the issue of better education that's needed within education to help young people really understand why diversity is good and not something to be ashamed of.
Simon, firstly, I'm touched and moved, and so sorry that today in 2021 that's still happening. And I think that just really, as you said, highlights the importance that there is reform in the education system, because for those people where home isn't going to be an environment, as Kate, to your point earlier, where's the goal, and what's the goal for 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And I hope we're in a really different place in 20 years time. But we know that for many young people, home isn't necessarily a safe space when they're coming out, and that's why the education system is so important, and that there are networks, and that there are, and again, it plays into this point as well of why is it so important that we're doing this work in the workplace. It's not just for me around those that are in the workplace, but it's then for parents, because so many people in the workplace are parents, that they are thinking differently around this topic. One of the conversations I have with many, not friends, but other parents or people that I do quite a lot of non-for-profit work in the education sector, and in local schools in the area, is that, and I hear this all the time, and I want to hear both of your responses to it and what you think, and any advice you could give me on this, is that, Johanna, I'm really comfortable if Simon is gay. That doesn't bother me. But if my Tim came out, I wouldn't be able to cope. And I hear this time and time again, whether I'm doing work, and I just... And my response is, and I often cite suicide rates. I often cite the point that you made, Simon, earlier about the rates of young people on the streets, or, just the impact, the sociological and the psychological impact that has to someone over their lifetime. But and any thoughts from all of the advocacy work that you're doing in this space is, what are the ways that we can start to shift mindsets from it being, oh, it's okay if it's here, but it's not okay if it's this close to me? Any advice? I know it's a very hard question.
This is very close to home for me, actually. This is exactly what my brother says about his child. And it's like, it's okay for you. And I said, oh, I'm like, that's interesting. So tell me more. Why? Just why? I love to ask people these questions, and I get a better understanding to see where that really comes from. And it's normally they can't really answer you or don't really have a definite reason. I think it's just all based on expectation. I never expected to be gay. It's not something that you wish for or dream of. It just happens. And then positioning it as, but surely if that's what makes them happy, that's the important bit, right? It doesn't matter what your kids end up to be, what job they have, what sexual orientation they are, or preferences. But ultimately, it's about happiness. Like you just said, suicide rates and things like that, that's all based on somebody being uncomfortable with themselves, being unhappy, so if we can get away from that, it is all ultimately about making sure that person is being authentically themselves, feeling comfortable within their own skin and being happy. So that's what I always do, is asking lots of questions and trying to dig deeper into really getting an understanding of where that comes from and trying to mitigate at the roots. But Simon, I'm sure you have some other great things as well that you do.
Yeah, I think your point there is absolutely spot on. Just to ask why. And keep asking why. We're trained in this in a kind of business sense anyway. It's the same kind of thing. Just keep asking why to get to the root cause of the problem. I can sympathise in some ways, because I think, and to your point, Kate, as well. I can relate to this as well. I can relate to my own background, and I think some of the homophobia that I faced has been out of fear, fear for me, and I kind of want to protect me as an individual, because someone doesn't want me to experience what they perceive the way that people are being treated in society more broadly. If I think of my parents, they've seen very visible homophobia. They lived through the AIDS crisis, where people were certainly being persecuted because they were gay, and it was almost encouraged that we should persecute these people because they're the people that are bringing or harboring this terrible virus disease. So I think it's homophobia manifested from a place of love, which I think is quite an interesting debate to have. But I think one that's quite important. It's out of love, care, and compassion, just heading off in the wrong direction. So ask. My advice is to ask the whys, but also ask what's the alternatives. And if it's I don't think I can cope, then you really need to take a long look at yourself, because what's the alternative? Would you rather not be able to cope, but find a way of coping with it than your child feeling that they aren't loved? Like these are really kind of emotive things, and I get saddened. I mean, I can talk about things like the Albert Kennedy Trust and the things that they do. That's an extreme of the alternative. But gosh, just think about Christmas or think about Thanksgiving and not having your kids around the table because they don't want to be with you as a parent. And it's things like that I think become very tangible very quickly, because they're very real things that happen and very real things that can happen.
Absolutely. I just want to build on that actually just quickly, if you don't mind. But that fear, absolutely agree. I actually admit that I used to be a bit homophobic, and probably if I delve deeper into that, it's because I was trying to hide something that scared the living daylights out of me because I didn't know what it was. So I used to be in that category, absolutely. And I think you're right, it's all based on fear. And it's therefore all about education. And I find, again, being a speaking coach, I'm of course going to say this, but the best form of education is through storytelling. When we tell facts and figures, we actually only ignite two different parts of the brain. But when we tell stories, we activate 7 different parts of the brain. So that's why advertising as it is, we act on emotion. That's why, you know, there's love and fear. That's the best forms of advertising. And again, it's a way to convince somebody or to change their mindset, and doing something is to tell them stories. So often I tell them about one of my really good friends whose father is a professional football player, and he wanted him to be a little mini professional football player. Then when he turned out as this beautiful camp gay guy, he rejected him, and they haven't spoken now for nearly 15 years. They, you know, I'm sure he'd be there if he really needed him, but on a day-to-day, he doesn't know who he is. They are so disconnected. I'm like, that's what I keep telling my brother with his child, is like, is that what you want? Because that is a possibility if you don't accept him for who he is. If my nephew does grow up to be gay, that's a potential.
That's really powerful there, Kate, and I'm also a lot of psychology around that, the power of storytelling, and, you know, from a marketing, from a you know, starting to help drive and change attitudes around that. And it really touches when you're both talking around that fear element as well, and how fear comes into a lot of this conversation in different and varying ways. I'm really, really having an amazing conversation with you both. I'm conscious of time and can see we've got a few questions of the audience. I just wanted to kind of round up our conversation with one final question, which is, if you were to give some advice to businesses about something that they could do, and it could be something really small, it could be something large, but based on all of your advocacy work, your own personal journeys and stories and experience, if a business was to do one thing that was less about lots and lots of different interventions, and in your view was to have the greatest chance of ensuring those from the LGBTQIA plus community felt genuinely included in the workplace, what would it be?
I'm going to continue by saying, keep speaking and encouraging people to speak. It's events like this that further that education, and it's not just about the LGBT community. It's so much more than that. It goes way beyond into, like you just said, allyship being extremely important, and setting that tone, that environment for people to feel like they have that psychological safety to be themselves at work, and that's going to help in all forms, right? It's going to help with creativity, productivity, everything end to end. That is really going to help the business be more profitable, period. So it's a really important thing for them to be investing in. And I would say that starts with encouraging people to speak.
I'm going to compliment your point, because I was starting with listen. So I noted down kind of 3 points, and they were listen, engage, and act. And I think they're, for me, really, really important. I think if I sum it up, it's probably that engagement, that kind of the mix between the engaging and giving the opportunity, the listening and giving the opportunity for people to speak in the first place. I think that's so incredibly powerful. I think that's what I've seen works best. I think that's what's worked for me as well in my career, and I think that's why I'm now in a space where I am within diversity and inclusion, because actually they were the opportunities that were afforded unto me, and actually I think there's a point there as well of kind of, when we look at LGBT people, it's not looking at a group of vulnerable people, it's looking at a group of powerful people, some of whom haven't been able to unleash their power yet, but when you're given that voice, it's not a voice of the vulnerable, it's a voice of the powerful. You know, everything that an LGBT person has been through on their journey, and however long that journey stretches, is incredibly interesting to hear, but incredibly powerful, how they've developed themselves and how they've fought some of the battles within themselves and around themselves as well. So listen, engage, and act. And if I summed it up into one, it would be the engage, to complement Kate's point.
Thank you both. And I think that point as well that you were making as you were talking about the power. And I think sometimes as well, a lot of the work that I've seen in business is that point. And I think that for many, they're starting to do better around the listening and listening to different experiences. But to the point of, how do you bring that power and how do you start to really, really build on the positive stories as well? And I think, again, it's hard, isn't it? Because I'm, not in the community, and often I think as society as well, and a lot around media is we focus on often the homophobia, we focus on the exclusion, but actually it's like, how do we build upon where it's working really well? And when someone has been included and when someone is genuinely able to feel that they're able to be their whole self, bring the whole self to work and perform at their best, what happens then? And sharing those stories, again, I think is just so powerful, and not just from others in the community, but everyone in the business as well. And I think sharing more of those stories are really, really important. I can see we've got one question in the audience, and if anyone else would like to ask a question, please do feel free to do so in the Q&A box. We've got one question, and that is, do you think that there's some sections of the LGBTQIA plus community who have been left behind in the progress that has been made, and how can we overcome this?
I'm happy to jump in with that one. I think the simple answer is yes. I think if you take apart the different elements of the LGBTQI+, then I think we've seen advancement in. We've talked a lot about homosexuality, about homophobia. I think as a whole, then I think the other elements are lagging behind in terms of the focus that they've been given as they become into different minorities in themselves, or they've been pushed into being a minority. I think there's a lot of opportunity now for the community that has a voice and the community that has a platform to support the rest of the community. If we reflect back to the Stonewall riots, the anniversary of which we were celebrating yesterday, it's kind of widely recognised that it was a trans woman of colour who threw the first brick that sparked some of the rioting. We have to pay homage to that because they were people that are still part of our community. If we've advanced our journey as lesbians, as gay men, then we have to look at the rest of the community as well and look at what else we can do. I was really, really reassured by that. At the weekend in London, we had Trans Pride, and actually seeing allies from across the LGBT community, from across the heterosexual community as well, join in to support trans people to really advance their cause was really, really powerful. So I think there are elements that have been left behind. I think there's opportunity for everyone to support some of those groups that really, really advocate for themselves and help them advance their cause. And actually what I found reassuring as well at the weekend, I found that Trans Pride was much more diverse than some of the other prides that I've been to, both in terms of age, in terms of colour. I think seeing young people there really, really on the ground protesting was incredible, absolutely incredible. So a positive message to kind of answer that question with is that people are recognising that younger people are engaging and younger people aren't putting up with what we've had to put up with before. So they're fighting their corner and they're fighting the corner from the people, which fills me with absolute joy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just would build on that and say, absolutely, it's all about representation. I think I alluded to it earlier, and it's really difficult to have a true representation. I'm sure, Johanna, you will find this as well in lots of your diversity efforts. So we need to keep making sure I think that's a part of our responsibility, being a part of the LGBT plus community. I, like I said, have taken on that responsibility myself to be that person who validated me. I now want to go and do that for others. I want to be that person who stands on stage and people come up after me and go, wow, because of what you said, I'm going to go and I feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to go and put that into action. And I feel like I can, empowered to go and be myself at work or otherwise. And like for the rest of the community, I constantly am helping coach trans, non-binary, other individuals, because it's really important that we hear their voices, hear their stories, so that we can learn, grow, and be educated ourselves. So that's my view.
No, that's great. Thank you both. Great answers to that question. And I can see we've just got one final question I'd like to ask you both, and it's: do you think that schools should provide resources to parents to help them understand diversity in relation to LGBTQ+, but also more widely? I'm also thinking about how more emphasis can be placed on parents and individuals to be more inclusive and accepting of their own accord without waiting for guidance from educators.
A really, really interesting question. I'm happy to jump in first on that one. I think it's a good question. I think there's in terms of resources, I'm not sure how much responsibility sits with schools. I think if that's one way to engage parents, then sure, there's opportunity there. I think there's plenty of resources that are out there. So perhaps for schools, it's more around the signposting. I mean, the schools are there to do a decent job with kids and young people. So actually, then taking on a step to educate parents could be quite a lot to do. Not impossible, and I've seen cases where it's or seen examples where it's worked well. But I think there are resources out there. I think parents are able to find their own resources. I think it's signposting from schools, but I think it's schools being really clear on what they expect within the culture of that school, within what happens within those school walls, within those school gates, to make a really firm commitment to diversity and inclusion, what will be tolerated and what's expected of children, young people, and parents when they're engaging in that school environment.
Yeah, 100%. Setting those framework, those boundaries and expectations is important anywhere, right? But more so for them. And I think to get parents buy-in and understanding of why they're doing that, what's the goal, what they're working towards. And like you said, Simon, there's tons of resources. And what's brilliant is the community is growing. So more and more I hear, oh, I know somebody who's gay, or I've got somebody in the family, or further afield. So it's a relatable story now, which is great, more so than it has been in the past. And then, yeah, I think that maybe schools can do a little bit more work with parents, perhaps sending some suggestions and recommendations. But really, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's got to come from the parents actually wanting to go and educate themselves and really making the effort themselves to do so.
No, absolutely, and I think that both those points that you said are really true. That there are so many resources, and it's about signposting to the right resources, making sure that you're focusing on the education with the children, but making sure that I think then when children are going home, that parents are also able, and and I think that's part of it. Being a parent. And so using that, to really encourage parents to go and explore topics that they might not have had. And again, I think that this is where there's this real crossover between the corporate space and organizations and the workplace, and then the education setting as well. And I think that there could be some smart work that we could do if we were ever able to, at a national level, where you started to make those connections, and that could be incredibly powerful. And that kind of goes back to Kate, one of the things that resonated when we first spoke as to where's our goal. And I think that it's about as well making continuous progress, signposting that progress, but also trying to be realistic about, okay, what do we feel that we can be achieving now, where for each of us that are advocates and allies in this work, where can we influence, and how can we then build upon that as well as we're working within our organizations and the people that within our network. I just wanted to say thank you so much both Kate and Simon. I've really, I apologise for my internet issues and in the middle, but I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been a very different conversation to many that I've had on this topic. And I think that's because you've both been so honest and open, both with your own stories, but the work that you're doing. So thank you. It's been great to speak with you both today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.